The Timeline is a Blue Wire podcast. Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. My name is Mike. I'm here with Sam. Sam, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm super ready. This is a little bit later than we anticipated. So sorry, but you're still going to get about 24 hours, maybe 36 hours to listen to this Suns Mavs round 2 preview. So yeah, listen now or forever hold your peace. How are you?
Good. It does feel like the Suns versus the Mavs was an inevitable playoff matchup that was going to happen just at some point. And now we're here. We're actually going to see it happen. And I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup because look, the Suns have beat them 9 times in a row. You know, Devin Booker has lost to them once basically in the last 3 years. DeAndre Ayton has lost to them once in like the last 3 years. And that's just where we're at with this team. But they are different, and I know doing my research, I realized it's actually pretty similar.
Binders of research, I imagine, by the way. We know you always come prepared to these episodes with thick binders full of notes. Am I right?
I have a lot, but I don't have as much. I'll be honest, I had more for the Pelicans one. I do feel like Fair. I just know that I know the Mavs. You know, like we play them a lot. The Suns play them 3 to 4 times every year, and we just have a lot of familiarity with them. I do think this team is different, though. They traded 100%. Porzingis. You know, that's the biggest thing, right? When talking about this team, it's pretty similar to the Pelicans, where we had a lot of evidence that the Suns were better than the Pelicans, and then they made some trades. The Pelicans got much better, came into the playoffs a different beast, and then the Suns played them as that beast. And I think it's pretty similar with the Mavs in that when I was looking at the team stats, stuff like that, team stats are all jacked up this year anyway. Post-trade deadline stats are pretty good, right? Because it's not a lot of COVID as far as people missing time for COVID post-trade deadline this year. So those stats actually, I think, have remained relatively valuable. And for the Mavs, I ended up just throwing all of the stats before that out because, Porzingis was such a huge part of that team, and now he's gone. Did you do the same?
Did the exact same thing, took all of my stats post-All-Star break, just like we did with the Pelicans. So we're dealing with smaller sample sizes, 20, 25 games as opposed to 82. But regardless, you're right on the other point that, like, first of all, this is not a very deep team. I think we can get into it later as we talk about them. Mm-hmm. But there aren't a whole lot of players in this rotation. And most of the players in this rotation we have seen a million times before. Luka Doncic, Jalen Brunson is a much different player now. We definitely have to talk about him. But like Dwight Powell or Maxi Kleber, guys who have been there forever. Yeah. Your favorite, Dorian Finney-Smith, as we all remember from one of your hit bangers. It's going down in the Mike V. Hill greatest hits collection. Most of these guys, like 5 out of 7 guys in these rotation, are guys we've seen a million times before. Mm-hmm. Now, they do have a slightly different style. We'll talk about that style. Mm-hmm. But, there is a certain level of familiarity here with most of the guys on this roster, for sure.
And for those who are listening to this thinking, where the hell's Mavs draft?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. We tried to get him on. Tough scheduling this time of year. Everyone's really busy during the playoffs. We'll try and get our friend Richie on at some point during this run. We love him. We're hoping to have him on this podcast previewing the team, but we are prepared to talk about them. Hopefully we'll talk about him in the future.
We'll have him on once the series hits peak toxicity levels. It'll be good for all. Right. Healthy.
I think it's pretty clear who Suns fans are going to hate after this series, right? It is and will always be Luka Doncic. He's the biggest irritant.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean after this series,
right.
dude? Oh, right. Actually, I am proud of Suns. Well, do I want to say this? I'm proud of us at least because I think the Luka Ayton narratives have not been as prevalent this year There was a time, and I think that's so much easier to do when the team is good, right? Like, there's no reason for us to just bitch and complain about everything all the time. But there was a time, you remember a few years ago, where it was all you ever talked about. It was all you ever heard as a Suns fan from other Suns fans, from the national media to an extent as well. And as we enter this series now, like, we could do an hour-long episode debating Luka versus Ayton narratives if we wanted to be just peak level obnoxious, but we're not going to. We're going to talk about the X's and O's and the offense defensive strategy, the rotations here and everything else. Because for the most part, you're right. I think Suns fans do feel a certain level of not animosity exactly, but some level of animosity towards the Mavs. But for the most part, that particular narrative has been put to bed this season, and I don't see people debating it as much. So I would like to pat some people in the community on the back for that, at least.
Yeah. I mean, it helps that DeAndre Ayton, once the playoffs start, you could confidently say there's only two centers you would take over him. And they're both MVP candidates. Like,
there's been no reason to complain.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
But with Luka, it's not just, that the history of the Suns having a chance to pick him, not picking him, and then the whole debates that came before and after that. It's also that he's just going to do something cheap, do something crazy, taunt the fans, whatever, that will make fans mad.
He's also guaranteed 12 free throws a night.
Right. Well, that's what's kind of nice, so I will say.
It is what it is.
The little cheap shots that fans like to take at Chris Paul, the Mavs fans are going to not be on solid ground when they make those cheap shots. Because Luka's exactly the same way. He does all the same stuff. It's just often even more magnified than what Chris Paul does. So I don't think the Suns are going to have a lot there. I will say the fan bases in general, for as much as that history exists, I think get along pretty well, and it's going to suck that they're going to hate each other after this series, because that is going to happen, because it happens after every series, especially the team that loses tends to be the one that hates the other fan base the most after it's over. But let's get into who the Mavericks are, because I think this conversation is interesting. I'm just going to run through the players really quick because, well, a couple of things. I think the starters and the bench are interesting. Who they play has been relatively interesting. The starters in the playoffs, when Luka Doncic was healthy, the starters have changed throughout the time, even after the trade deadline. But the starters right now in the playoffs were Jalen Brunson, Luka Doncic, Reggie Bullock, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Dwight Powell. And those are the starters. You'll notice one massive difference there than you would expect, and that's that Spencer Dinwiddie did not start in those lineups. They started essentially Brunson, Luka, and defense is their goal in that scenario, which I think makes a lot of sense, but was still a surprise to me when I was going through this. I expected more often Dinwiddie would start. So the main bench pieces is Dinwiddie, Spencer Dinwiddie, Maxi Kleber, Davis Bertans, which
a little bit.
He basically didn't play in the last game. Josh Green as well, basically didn't play in the last game. So I have a feeling these guys might play to start the series and then slowly get whittled out of the rotation as the series gets closer and closer.
Let me just say right off the bat, I think one of the first things that's striking when you look at the Mavs is it's effectively a 7-man rotation. It's not a very deep team.
Yeah.
Like you said, Davis Bertans, Josh Green, they both averaged about 10 to 12 minutes per game in that first series. But if you actually look at the game logs, it was because of the absence of Luka. They were playing closer to 15 minutes at the beginning of the series to fill in time on the wing rotation. Towards the back half, games 5, game 6, they were playing like 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Which I think, by the way, Mike, is still interesting because I think if either of those two guys kind of they've solidified themselves, if you will, as the 8th and 9th members of the rotation, if they touch the floor at all, even if it's for 4 or 5 minutes, for very different reasons, I think it's a huge advantage for the Suns. So those two players right there, I will say it's interesting. But in sum, when I look at the Mavericks, I think this is a 7-man rotation. It's 3 guards who can all do their damage with a high level of dribbling skill and isolation skill. And those are obviously Luka, Brunson, Dinwiddie. It's 2 stereotypical 3-and-D wings in Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith. And then the 2 bigs in Powell and Kleber. And that's basically all you've got.
Yeah. The Suns played the Mavs 3 times this year, won all 3 games. Some relatively memorable games, but the team's different now. There's one specific game that stuck out in my mind where Mikal Bridges ended up guarding Kristaps Porzingis. I think Luka was out that game at the end of the game and was the best defender on both Jalen Brunson and Kristaps Porzingis in the same game, which is just a very Mikal Bridges thing to do. When we talk about guarding them, I think this is going to be interesting, but let me go through a couple other stats that I'm sure you have. They are plus 3.5 in net rating since the All-Star break, which is the 7th in the league, and it's actually the worst of all the Western Conference teams left. So when looking at net rating post-trade deadline, they're the lowest of, the Grizzlies, the Warriors, the Suns, and then...
Can I ask a follow-up question that you may or may not have?
Mm-hmm.
Do you happen to remember where the Pelicans were? Weren't they? They were top 10, right?
Yeah, they were. They were 4th or 5th, I believe, in
Here's
that
a
time.
really interesting question. And I know we got to talk about the Mavs real quick. Who do you think's better? Like, if theoretically,
I think the Mavs are better.
You think the Mavs are better?
Yeah.
Okay, we could talk about that more later. I kind of wanted to get your take on it. I was like, who do you think is better? We'll touch on it maybe later, but keep going.
Like, second in net rating over that entire time was the Jazz, and the Jazz are the worst of all the teams we just talked about.
Yeah.
So net rating doesn't always tell the full story. It often tells the story of who shot the most threes during that time, and that was the Jazz. But I do think the Mavs are better. I think the difference between the Pelicans and the Mavs is the defense, and the Mavs just have a good defense. In fact, 7th in defense over that time, 14th in offense. So their defense really is carrying them in that net rating number. But what's interesting during this time, and I think this is relevant to the Suns, since All-Star break, they're 9-1 in the clutch. And previous to that, their clutch rating was not good. So it's entirely carried by what happened post-trade deadline. And they've won out of 10 clutch games, 10 games that went to the clutch post-trade deadline. They won 9 of them. And I think that's an important stat when talking about this matchup against the Suns. What stood out to you when looking at some of the team stuff for the Mavs?
Well, I just want to address the clutch thing. We always talk about how clutch play is all about having triple threat scorers, isolation scorers, essentially, who can break down a defense when everything else falls apart offensively. And if there's anything that defines the Mavs' offensive footprint, it's that. And people think of Luka, but it's really not just Luka. On the whole season, because this is a stat that is relevant to the whole season, not just before the All-Star break, Luka Doncic was, according to Synergy, a 91st percentile ISO scorer this year. Spencer Dinwiddie was a 94th percentile ISO scorer this year, and Jalen Brunson was a 65th percentile ISO scorer. They have 3 legitimate isolation scores. Now, that doesn't necessarily always mean that you can just jam a bunch of guys who are very similar like that into the same lineup, and that the entire lineup would be cohesive, because sometimes that can create other issues. But at least in terms of the versatility of their offense, they have a lot of options to work with in the clutch. They have 3 solid guys out of their real 7-man rotation who you can plug into a clutch lineup and feel relatively comfortable about their ability to make big and tough shots. That's very important. The big thing that stood out to me in terms of stats as I was looking is 30th in pace. Did you have this one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's huge.
Snail's pace. 91.25 in the playoffs is what they played in the first round.
91.25 in the playoffs, 95 possessions per game in the regular season. And actually what I think is interesting about this too, Mike, is they were 30th in pace even before the KP trade. And they remained 30th in pace after the KP trade. So the difference pre-KP versus post-KP is mostly about defensive identity, and to an extent it's also about spacing identity on offense and really committing to the 5-out lifestyle and all that stuff. But it really is a lot more about defense. Offensively, in terms of how they handle the ball, whether or not they look for transition opportunities, that's all stayed the same for this Dallas Mavericks team. Their identity all season long has been to play at a snail's pace, to give the ball to their best ball handlers, and trust that their ball handlers can cook in the half court, can penetrate, can break down the initial wall of the defense, get a defense in rotation, and then either obviously finish at the rim for a layup or swing around and look for the open shooter for 3. That's who the Mavs are, but they're not a transition team.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not a transition team. And had this been last year's Suns team, who were also damn near close to 30th in pace, maybe that wouldn't seem like, it literally wouldn't be a contrast, and maybe it wouldn't seem like much of an advantage to draw on. but we know how much the Suns have focused on picking up the pace at various intervals this season, how they do have some very effective transition scorers on their team, and I think it could come into play quite a bit in this series for sure.
I was shocked when I saw it was slow. I knew they played slow because you just watch them, and they play slow, but the extent to which they play slow really stood out to me. They are one of the slower teams, the slowest team in the playoffs so far, and one of the slowest teams in the league, if not slowest.
I think it's because you look at their roster and they're young, right? Like, they don't have... I think they've got a couple of guys, Kleba and Powell, who are 30 years old.
Yeah, maybe Dinwiddie's like 30, right?
He's if he's not quite yet, then he's close, like maybe 28, 29. But they don't have anyone on their roster who's like ancient, right? So you think, oh, they could play fast if they wanted to. But then you look at the actual numbers, and you think about it a little bit more. Who can really gun it on that team? Right. You know what I mean? Like Bullock
Brunson.
and Finney,
basically.
Even him, he's kind of interesting because you know what? I think Jalen Brunson. Do you want to just jump into the Jalen Brunson discussion?
Sure, yeah.
Of like who are the Mavs?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Jalen Brunson.
Yeah.
If there's any player who I think Suns fans maybe still to this point have not been introduced to, because we know who Luka Doncic is. He's one of the top 5 he's one of the top 5 players in the NBA. At worst, like what, top 7? Mm-hmm. He's phenomenal. If there's any player who has the potential to take the reins here and be a legitimate number 2 star, which could allow Dallas to have themselves a close series, it's Jalen Brunson. Let me pull up the first round series stats here.
27.8 points per game in the first round. And here's the
what
stat.
An introduction.
21.3 field goal attempts per game for Luka Doncic, 21 for Jalen Brunson. They shot the same number of shots, and on those shots, Jalen Brunson was more efficient. Now, efficiency also factors in free throw attempts. Well, that's not that different either. Luka Doncic shot 6.7 free throw attempts per game. Jalen Brunson shot 6.5 free throw attempts per game. Like the difference between Doncic and Brunson, when you look at the stats from just the Jazz. Now, keep in mind the Jazz have some of the worst perimeter defense in the league, and their perimeter defense in the playoffs was the worst I've seen it by them. So these guys are just getting by them over and over and over again. But looking at the stats here, Jalen Brunson had a superstar level impact in the first round.
In the first round, no doubt.
And I think,
first of all, he's going to get paid a shit ton of money. Everyone's already talked about that.
Yeah, probably not by the Mavs, I think, at this point.
This was a guy who was previously a good initiating guard, like a second type guard. You know, he averaged like 16 and 4 on the season. In the games where Luka was out, because Luka missed like 15 games this season, he averaged over 20 points per game. The Mavericks were able to tread water. But even so, there's a difference between doing that and doing what he did to the Jazz. There's an entirely different... He was on an entirely different planet in terms of impact. I mean, to average 28 points per game in a playoff series like that is phenomenal. What I really like about Jalen Brunson's game as I watch him is that he is by far the most versatile player offensively in terms of his shot selection on this Mavericks team, because compared to the Suns, who we all know the Suns' entire shtick at this point is to be the most versatile or to have the most versatile shot profile possible. Even the role players are taking mid-range shots. The Mavs generally have not approached that. They have been more along the lines of your typical, what I would call the Morey ball approach, the heliocentric approach. Put the ball in Luka's hands. Luka's either driving to the rim or he's taking the step back 3. The role players are shooting threes. Maybe if you're Dwight Powell, you're a rim runner. But everyone knows their role and they're doing their thing. The exception to the rule, Dinwiddie does it a little bit too, but the big exception to the rule is Jalen Brunson, who, if you look at his shot chart for the first round, Mike, yes, he hit some threes. Yes, he finished at the rim. Obviously, to get to 28 points per game, you need to do a little bit of everything. But where he really cooked the Jazz, and I posted a compilation of this on Twitter the other day, he cooked the Jazz in the short mid-range area, like with basically the Chris Paul area, either at the elbow, maybe 1 foot in the paint. But there are clips. You can go and find this video or just look up, game by game yourself. He was going after Bogdanovich. He was going after Mitchell. He was going after Gobert. He made Gobert look like a fool in that area where he would ISO on him and basically dance with him. Mm-hmm. And what I think is so interesting, and this relates back to how we got here in the first place, because we were talking about transition, it's not so much that Jalen is an explosive athlete. He's not the fastest guy in the NBA, and that kind of makes sense with where their pace statistic is in the first place. And actually, if you look at his finishing numbers, he does get to the line. He does score at the rim, but he's not like an above average finisher at the rim by any means. It's not where he excels. Where I think he excels is just that he's one of the most skilled ball handlers that you'll find.
Yeah.
He's got the combination. He'll freeze defenders one-on-one, and he's got the combination, whether it's a crossover, a spin move, a hezzy. He's got beautiful, beautiful footwork, and he's going to be, tough to handle no matter who the Suns decide to put on him as his primary defender. I think that's an interesting debate for us to have as well.
We should talk about that next, yeah.
Sure, but it's not so much that he's like an over-the-top explosive athlete. He's not quicker than other guys necessarily, but he's really skilled. He's undoubtedly a talented ISO finisher. And so now you've got Luka, who you already know is a handful, but when you give this team another top-level ISO finisher, that's how you know that they can survive late in games. And so a huge question that's going to be hanging over the entire series is, was Jalen Brunson's first round this outlier that he's going to regress back down to 16 points per game on average efficiency? Or can he be that guy 2 series in a row? Because if he can be that guy 2 series in a row, they definitely are. They're right there. They are definitely right there.
And like the contrast between Doncic and Brunson, Doncic is slow, deliberate, strong in pick and rolls, right? You can't really stop him from getting to his spots. He can shoot floaters over you. He can shoot little layups and things like that. He can do the step back threes. And then you have Jalen Brunson, that's just sort of this lightning bolt popping around, almost like a water bug dancing on top of a lake or something like that. He's just bouncing around all over the place, unpredictable, fast, up fakes, up and unders, pull-ups from mid-range, floaters, 3-point shots occasionally. He shoots, actually shoots quite a bit in the first round. And it's just a lot different of a type of guy to guard than Luka Doncic. And also, what stood out to me, Doncic had 5.7 assists per game. In the first round, he was injured, coming back from injury, but 4 turnovers on those 5.7 assists, where Jalen Brunson had 4.2 assists and less than 1 turnover per game on those 4.2 assists. So his effectiveness as a scorer, obvious, but his effectiveness as a playmaker, maybe slightly less obvious when Doncic has the obvious assist number overall, but much more turnovers, more than 4 times as many turnovers per game as Jalen Brunson. Brunson was able to not only dish it out to some guys, but not turn it over. And I think that's a big thing where for the Suns, you have to make his life harder. I think that he had a pretty easy time here in the first round against the Jazz, who were letting that first line of defense was just letting him by. And then you have Gobert running off of the corner from a shooter. And, the classic thing where the top of Gobert's body's going one way, the bottom of his body's going another. And Jalen Brunson was taking advantage of that over and over and over again. And I think for the Suns, let's talk about how they guard them. Because I was pontificating last night because I just can't quite decide what the best option is for the Suns. Because the Suns have 2 excellent defenders. I mean, the whole team is good. And, Ayton is one of the best rim protectors in the league now. But then you have, on the perimeter, you have Jay Crowder, Mikal Bridges. The initial thought, and I think this is still where I am for the record, I think, is Luka Doncic has Mikal Bridges on him. But then what do you do with Jay Crowder? So I think this is interesting. Let's first talk about the starters. I'm going to reiterate the starters. Luka Doncic, Jalen Brunson, Reggie Bullock, Dorian Finney-Smith, Dwight Powell. That's currently who we assume they're going to start, with Dinwiddie coming off the bench because that's what they did in the last 3 games against the Jazz. The ones we know for sure, I think, are Ayton on Powell. That's the first one.
Yeah.
And Chris Paul and Reggie Bullock, right?
Chris Paul and Reggie Bullock, yep.
I think those are the only 2 obvious that I'm like 100% certain on.
Those are obvious. Bullock's just, Chris Paul will have to chase him around a couple screens, but for the most part, he's starting sets in the corner. He's looking for threes and not much else. That's obvious.
So let's just do those 2 guys. Okay, right away. We're done with that.
Yeah.
Who guards, let's start here. Who guards Jalen Brunson, in your opinion?
I'm going to throw a curveball. Well, maybe it's not a curveball, but I saw your tweet last night about maybe Mikal guards Brunson, and I saw a lot of people agreeing with it too in the comments, and I was like, y'all are overthinking it. I think it's Booker. I think it's Devin Booker. You might say I'm overthinking it, but
I mean, this is
now. I'm
overthinking it too, so I'm not going to accuse you of that.
What's your first impression when I say that? Do you want to react to it, or do I have to defend my case first?
Well, here's where I land, and here's where I keep sort of overthinking is who does Jay Crowder guard is where I keep landing. Because then if you have Devin Booker on Jalen Brunson, then you have Jay Crowder on Dorian Finney-Smith, and you have Mikal Bridges on Luka, which is fine.
Yep.
It's fine.
That's my look. Yep.
But are you maximizing Jay Crowder in that sense? Because Dorian Finney-Smith doesn't really dribble, right? And Jay Crowder is going to have to help a lot in order to be maximized in that role, which does leave Dorian Finney-Smith open for threes, and he's been a good three-point shooter so far this year.
Wait, but hold on, because you're going to have to help. Well, okay, philosophically speaking, you have to decide how much you're willing to help at all, because there's a world where the Suns actually say, we're just going to switch everything and we're not going to help. We're going to leave guys on an island and make sure that we contain the shooters. Maybe we let Luka cook us for 35 points per game, but no one else is going to beat us. So that's a strategy right there. You could do that if you want. Now, if you do put Jay or Booker, and it really doesn't matter who it is, in positions where they have to help a lot, say at the nail, no matter what, there is no Herb Jones on this team. There is no Jose Alvarado on this team. If you're helping at the nail, you're helping off a shooter.
Yeah.
And so whether that's Dorian Finney-Smith, whether that's Chris Paul hiding in the corner on Reggie Bullock, whether it's whoever's guarding Jalen Brunson, it almost doesn't matter, I would say, in terms of that aspect of the argument, because no matter who you're helping off here, you're helping off a shooter, with the exception, of course, being Ayton if he's guarding Powell. But even there, they're going to play a lot of Maxi Kleber, and he's going to space you 5 out. So this is a good shooting team, especially compared to the Pelicans, and that's like the first piece of the puzzle that we need to just make ourselves comfortable with.
I think that you're probably right. That
Can I explain why I like Booker on Brunson too? Mm-hmm. So what I was just talking about, or what we were just talking about a few minutes ago when we broke down who Jalen Brunson is as a player. Do you remember our initial characterization of Chris Paul when he first came to Phoenix, and the Suns started out that first season 8-8, and their offense was pretty good, but something wasn't quite clicking? Mm-hmm. Basically, it was an offense where it was very your turn, my turn between Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and it was very clear that you had two talented isolation scorers but didn't exactly know what to do with them in the concept of the overall offense. That's kind of how I view the Dallas Mavericks right now with Luka Doncic and Jalen Brunson. It's not that they're not a talented offense. It's not that they can't cook you in clutch situations, but they don't have sets like the Suns do that maximize the abilities of both of their two quote-unquote star players at once. So what that means is you've got a lot of Luka cooking on the ball. Jalen's kind of just there. He's just kind of spacing the floor just like any other shooter. Or you've got Jalen trying to cook on the ball. Luka's just there. He's not setting screens. He's not cutting to the basket. He's just, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for the defensive strategy specifically? We've always said about Devin Booker that if you give him tough assignments on the ball, he remains very engaged. Yes, like you don't necessarily want to tire him out too much because of the offensive load that he's going to be taking as well. But the issue we've always had with Booker, if there have been issues this season, is, and not just this season, but over the past 2-3 seasons, is, yeah, he's really engaged on the ball. Sometimes he falls asleep off the ball. He's not in the right helper position. I think this season, more so than any other season, that's been less so the case as he continues to get better and better at the team defense as well. If that wasn't the case, then the Suns wouldn't be the number 3 defense of the league. But even so, Jay excels as a helper, as a team defender. Booker excels as an on-ball defender who's engaged when he's guarding a guy with, even if that's a guy with like a nice dribble package like Jalen Brunson has. So if Brunson is going to be this guy who's mostly playing an on-ball role for the Mavericks, but when he's off-ball, he's not really doing anything, I think that's a really good matchup for Booker, actually. I think it makes a lot of sense to stick Booker there. Mikal Bridges is going to take Luka Doncic as he always does. And the other thing, by the way, is that Dorian Finney-Smith, not for nothing, after the series we just came off of, is a pretty solid offensive rebounder. So if there's anyone who you just want to throw an extra body into them, they're not nearly the same type of physical team as New Orleans was. But if there's another guy you want to keep off the boards, Jay Crowder could handle that assignment really easily, I think.
I get that. And I think that is a strong possibility that that's where the Suns start. I'm going to make two cases for two other things, though. One, Mikal Bridges on Jalen Brunson. The reason I was considering that is because you then would be able to put Jay Crowder on Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic has been just bullying guys so far in the playoffs. The reason Mikal Bridges is so good on Luka Doncic is two things. One, he's able to properly sort of push him into the spots where Ayton can be a help defender, which we will talk about their 5-out offense in just a second. But it's often with Luka, it's not one person, right? It's multiple people guarding Luka Doncic. And the difference between Jay Crowder and Mikal Bridges on Luka Doncic is if Luka just drops his shoulder into you and steps back, Mikal's length still allows him to contest that shot in a way that Jay Crowder's length does not. The other side of that is Jay Crowder is stronger. So if he's trying to get pushed around a little bit, he's not going to be as successful pushing him as he is against Mikal Bridges. So there's that factor. And on the other side of that, Mikal Bridges could effectively shut down a lot of the stuff that Jalen Brunson is trying to do, because Jalen Brunson will have to shoot an incredibly high-arching shot every single time he has to shoot against Mikal Bridges, where he doesn't really have to do that against Devin Booker, who is not only shorter, but also has much, much shorter arms, so less length in general. And I think Jalen Brunson probably goes off in the scenario where Devin Booker's on him. The other thing I'm worried about in that scenario, foul trouble. I'm kind of worried about Devin Booker getting in foul trouble if Jalen Brunson's guarding him.
I don't think it's. I think you're talking about it like an inevitability that he goes off. I don't think, like, Booker has been a good on-ball defender all season long. I don't think we have to worry about it. And the other thing I would counter with is I posted the stats. Mikal Bridges has logged two. This is tracking data, so it's not always great. But in this case, it's a huge sample, so I'm still going to throw it out there. Mm-hmm. He's logged 224 possessions against Luka Doncic over the past 3 seasons combined. In that time, Luka has scored 59 points on 61% true shooting in those possessions. 61% true shooting is good, but here's what you point to. He also has 14 assists to 11 turnovers when Mikal Bridges is the primary guy. So first of all, I would say, how many possessions does Jay Crowder have there? I didn't actually look it up, but I would imagine like less than half of that amount of possessions on Luka compared to what Mikal has played. For all of the advantage that you have with Jay's strength, you're losing something with Mikal's length. And you talked about how Luka is already prone to high turnover games to begin with. You get to cut off passing lanes early on in the shot clock. You get to create transition opportunities that way, easy buckets on offense. I mean, for everything that you're giving away, you're also getting something back in that Mikal matchup. I think you're overthinking it. That's all. Like, I think they want their best guy on Dallas's best guy, which has always been the case for this team for as long as I can remember now. And like, you could put Mikal on Jalen. It's like, you could do it, but I think you're overthinking it. And if you ask me what I think is going to happen, I think there's basically a 0% chance that Mikal Bridges starts the series on Jalen Brunson, but we'll see. If I'm wrong, then you can dance on my grave on Twitter.
I 100% agree with you. I think
I just don't see how they do it. They've like never done that.
I think there's a difference between starting the series on Luka Doncic and guarding him the entire series to start every single game. I think there is a chance that Mikal Bridges starts a game on Jalen Brunson, depending on how it goes with Jay Crowder guarding Luka Doncic, because there's a chance he does a really good job in this series, and then you can trust that a little bit more. The other case I want to make, because I think you're right, I think the Suns are just going to put Mikal Bridges on Luka Doncic, and that's just where they're going to start. And I'm not saying that doesn't make sense. I think that does make sense. Obviously, he's the best defender in that scenario, and he's guarded him the most, right? He has the most familiarity with his game, because when Jay Crowder has been on the Suns, Kristaps Porzingis was on the Mavs the majority of that time, which meant that Jay Crowder was on that matchup.
Assignment. Yeah, way different.
So the other option is keeping Devin Booker on Dorian Finney-Smith and just putting Jay Crowder on Jalen Brunson and seeing how it goes.
Yeah, you could do that.
Because I think that just Devin Booker wise, I think that it's okay to still put him on a shooter. And although I think Jay Crowder is not the best suited to guard somebody like Jalen Brunson, he is the smartest defender you have left in that scenario. Of course, Chris Paul is probably a genius on defense as well, but the physical capabilities are not quite there. Jay Crowder, normally you want to put him on somebody strong. But in this case, if you have Mikal Bridges on Luka Doncic, just put somebody smart on Jalen Brunson who's able to recognize the plays that are being run, to maybe get into the passing lane when they're trying to swing the ball to Jalen Brunson, that kind of thing. I think that might be where they start. And it might be counterintuitive to a lot of people just because you think that Jay Crowder has relatively slow foot speed. And yeah, that's kind of true. And maybe Jay Crowder gets embarrassed a couple of times guarding somebody like Jalen Brunson. But I do think that of all the defenders left, even with Devin Booker included, Jay Crowder is the most likely to make Jalen Brunson's life a little bit harder of everybody left.
I think that scenario makes the most sense in a case where this is inside information that we don't have, but in a case where the Suns are still concerned about Devin Booker's hamstring. They know that his foot speed isn't going to be at 100% of what it usually is either, and they really want to conserve him for offense. And so they say, yeah, you have to box out Dorian Finney-Smith a couple extra times, but for the most part, that matchup is just going to be much less labor-intensive for you, so we're going to put Jay on Jalen. I think that makes sense.
Or if Book gets two fouls in the first 5 minutes of the game.
Sure. But in a case where Book is theoretically, if he's at 100%, I just want to reiterate, I totally trust him at this point with his level of defensive improvement. I think you could throw him at Jalen, no problem. And I don't think Jalen is going to generate enough contact to get him into foul trouble. I don't think it's something that would frequently happen. So I will maintain that I think you can really live with Book accepting that assignment. Now, if you're worried about his hamstring and you want to put Jay there, I get it.
Yeah, I'll go on the record just saying I don't like Devin Booker on Jalen Brunson. I understand why people like that. I understand it. I just think on individual possessions over the course of a game, yeah, that's fine. You know, even maybe a quarter. But over the entire length of an entire game, I don't like it.
I think we're focusing a little bit too much on ball defense when we already know that they're going to be switching so much anyway. And it's more so the concept of once they get you past the initial stage, once they break through the initial barrier, and now you're in rotation. I have so much confidence in Jay always kind of playing as a low man and rotating out, Xing out, getting to the corner, getting to the wing, but being the lower man to begin with in that rotation. Whereas Booker, yeah, I have some level of confidence in him, but I just think it's a role that Jay can nail. So if he has the opportunity to help off a guy like Finney-Smith, you know, I just think he excels there. That's like what separates Jay to Cam Johnson for me. Like when I think about, you know, Cam Johnson is a good defender too, but he's not the team defender that Jay Crowder is. And I think, potentially we could see the difference there this series. But
the odd thing that you would think about the Mavs is you would think they'd play their three best offensive players more.
This is interesting. Did you look into the lineup stats here? Because if not, I have the numbers.
Less than 8 minutes per game in the playoffs with Luka, Dinwiddie, and Brunson all on the floor together in the first round. Less than 8 minutes together. And I think Jason Kidd as a coach, I think, really focuses on defense. They start their best defensive lineup with their two best offensive players. Dinwiddie comes off the bench and plays less with both Luka and Brunson. Generally just plays with one of those two guys on the floor at a time to maximize the time when one of them is off the floor, but also to keep their defense as good as possible by surrounding their two best offensive players playing at any moment with three other defensive players. So you'd think that would play more. And I think that would put the Suns in an interesting position as far as who guards who. If they played all three, which they could, maybe even they'll go to that at some point, but just for the record, Spencer Dinwiddie, not good in the playoffs so far. 36% from the field, 29% from three. So far, not very good.
Something we kind of forgot to talk about with Dinwiddie probably is the fact that so much of Dallas's success in the second half of the season was Dinwiddie. He's not going to play. I don't think he's going to play as bad in the first round as he did he's not going to play as bad in this round as he did in the first round. It's just not possible. He was phenomenal to close the season in the final 20 games. Now, let me give you a slightly better sample size here. In the regular season, they did 120 minutes of the three-man lineup you're talking about, Dinwiddie, Brunson, Doncic. The results were a +2 net rating, a 113 offensive rating, a 111 defensive rating, which is not very good.
Very bad.
And honestly, Mike, to me, I think it's intuitive. It's logical. Like, you envision these three guys, and it's an even more extreme version of what I was already talking about with Doncic and Brunson. If you don't find a way to properly integrate having three undersized, talented, but undersized offensive creators, you know you're giving up something on defense. And if you don't find the way to integrate them on offense, if it's just going to be pass around the perimeter, dribble, try and drive, again, work the defense into a rotation, like the offense will be good because you've got three guys who can break a defense down, but they're not working cohesively. It's not like like the Suns-Spain pick and roll or something, right? Where everyone knows their role and everyone is working to maximize a particular advantage that they are elite at. If the Mavs can't find a way to work cohesively with those three guys on the floor, then yeah, that lineup could be good. It's not going to be their death lineup or whatever. Mm-hmm. So to me, it makes sense. I think it's a look that we'll see at some point in the playoffs, but I think what they're giving up on the defensive end is so obvious that if I'm the Suns, it's not a major point of concern.
The Suns are going to kill that lineup offensively if they play all three of those guys. They just don't really have the guys. Doncic was bad at defense in the playoffs so far. Jalen Brunson, look, high effort on defense, but he's like 5'9", and if he gets switched out into Devin Booker, that's food every single time. Even Mikal Bridges probably, especially since they have a history at Villanova. And then Spencer Dinwiddie, for as good as he was offensively towards the end of the season, I think gives up a lot defensively against this Suns team. They have to rely, I don't know, maybe they go entirely small. Maybe they go Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith at center if they play all three of those guys and just rely on switching everything. They
will.
Can
we talk about that lineup too?
Yeah, let's talk about 5 out. They're 5 out. But their 5 out lineup,
by the way,
often had Maxi Kleber.
Jalen Brunson is listed at 6'1", just to give some respect to him in case any Mavs fans listen to this. Hearing you say that he's 5'9",
yeah, but he's not. But, yeah. He's not 6'1" though.
he's 6 foot.
He's 6'1" in the way that Chris Paul is 6 foot. Like, that's not true. I don't believe it. When the Mavs played against the Jazz, and what the Clippers did against the Jazz, what everyone seems to do against the Jazz except the Suns, they played with 5 shooters essentially, and they just allowed Doncic to isolate with 5 shooters. Sometimes ran screens, sometimes didn't. Sometimes just did the fake screens to get switches, and then isolated against switches. And in the playoffs so far, the most often 5-out lineup that I saw included Maxi Kleber, who shot 51% on 5 threes per game in the playoffs, which would be a disaster for the Suns if he continued to do that.
He was ridiculous. Mm-hmm. He shot 16 of 31 overall on the series. Almost every single one of his attempts in the whole series was a 3. And just so you guys know how the way the Mavs rotation works is Powell and Kleber, it's basically a spectrum. Powell on one end of the spectrum is your traditional drop big, who's a really, really good rim runner, by the way. He's like has a insane efficiency when paired with Luka, no surprise, when you're paired with a playmaker like that. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Kleber, who's just a 5-out. He's a floor spacer. And they've been playing them about 24-24, about 50-50 in terms of playing time, with a curveball that Monty does have to be prepared for. They do sometimes go with Dorian Finney-Smith at the 5 for a complete small ball lineup. But 90% of the time, they're playing one of the bigs, and Kleber is that guy who spaces you out, 5-out. Need to be prepared.
And they're not going to start Kleber, as far as I know.
They could, but I don't think they will.
And if they come off the bench with Kleber, this might not be the series for JaVale McGee.
I agree.
And there's Big 2 time. Options you could do. Torrey Craig at center or Biyombo at center. But JaVale can't move his feet against pick-and-pop guys. That's been his main kryptonite all year. And it just has not yet been good. I think often he played himself off. The way that people think that Ayton could get played off the court, which is just not true, is true about JaVale McGee.
Yes. Yeah. But hey, that's the difference between a guy who signs for $5 million a year for like half the MLE, which is what JaVale did, and a guy who's going to get a max contract in DeAndre Ayton, alongside a lot of other offensive differences that have become clear now over the past 12 months. But defensively, when we talk about like the offensive insinuation that has come up throughout DeAndre Ayton's career that has always been offensive, but is especially offensive now about why not just get a guy for 1/10 of the price of Ayton who can do 80% of what he can do on defense? Well, the other 20% really, really, really matters in the playoffs. And in a series like this, if you continue to play JaVale McGee, his guaranteed 10 or 15 minutes every night, I think against Kleba, against Finney Smith, if they go completely small, it will become evident. So you do need to have an answer to that.
It'll be interesting to see how the Suns combat that, because I think the most likely scenario is they start with JaVale McGee and try to hammer them on the boards, because they are they're probably the worst rebounding team the Suns are going to face if they make a run to the finals. The Mavericks. They were 23rd in offensive rebounds on the season. Just not a good offensive rebounding team. That held true after the trade deadline as well. When they spread the floor and they have Luka Doncic basically driving to the rim, Jalen Brunson driving to the rim, well, they only have one guy close to the rim in that scenario. The Suns can hammer them there. And on the other side, Maxi Kleba, Dwight Powell, strong guys, tall guys, but not overly long, not overly athletic to be able to get on the offensive boards. The Suns should win the rebounding battle, which is great news for the Suns, because one of their biggest weaknesses has been allowing offensive rebounds over and over and over again. So the Suns need to absolutely win the rebounding battle.
Just because you win the rebounding battle doesn't mean you win the series, and we saw that with New Orleans. I really like this as a Torrey Craig series. I said it on Twitter the other day. I mean, I don't mind if Monty wants to try JaVale. I'm not saying you cut him entirely out of the rotation from game one. Give him a stint. Give him 4, 5, 6 minutes. But instead of necessarily giving him 12 to 15, in my opinion, you could give all the rest of those minutes to Torrey, and Torrey could play 15 or 20 minutes in the series. If you want to have Biyombo in against Kleba, fine. That makes sense as well. Now, if they bring Dorian Finney-Smith in at the 5, I think you basically just have to match with Torrey. And at that point, it's less about a rebounding thing, which doesn't really concern me too much, and it's more just about let's embrace switching everything defensively, because that's what they're going to do type thing. And let's have as many switchable wings as possible who can go out and guard Luka on the perimeter if they have to, because JaVale is just not it, man. And honestly, in that situation, I don't even know if Biyombo is it either. If you're in a situation where Biyombo is constantly having to switch or try and kind of funnel against either Luka or Brunson, I think even he will have a difficult time. So I am really, really a big believer in this being a Torrey Craig redemption series. I think he probably feels like shit for the fact that he was reacquired by the Suns. He was super excited to come back. He
got killed.
Yeah, and this was supposed to be the redemption year for him and the entire team in general. And then he goes into the first round and gets entirely cut out of the rotation in games 5 and 6, just gets destroyed by Brandon Ingram. So I'm sure he's already a little bit down on himself, but is ready for a chance at his own redemption. This just feels like a great matchup for him. As long as he can go out there, do his typical thing on offense, fight for offensive rebounds, and hit 35% of his threes, nothing crazy, but just be okay, his defensive value could really shine through in a series like this against a defense that's going to be an offense that's going to be trying to space you out, 5 out constantly. He will excel in that role, and I really hope that Monty does play more of him, because I think he's up for it. We'll see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a good chance that he gets a pretty significant amount of minutes as the series goes along, but I think we've seen a lot of Monty. He tries stuff that has worked in the regular season first, and then goes... he tries to dictate the terms of the game, We can agree on one thing. We are not seeing a Bismack Biyombo, DeAndre Ayton too big lineup this series, correct? No, the Suns, the real truth of the matter is, this series will come down to offensive execution, because the rebounding battle will probably be relatively even. And I think that defensively, I think the Mavericks are going to struggle to defend the Suns in ways that the Suns will not struggle to defend the Mavs. And everything else being even, assists, rebounding, second chance points, fast break points, whatever, it's going to come down to who's the most efficient team offensively. And I think the Suns have a good opportunity to do that really well. And that means that two bigs, which is designed for defense and rebounding, is not the way to go. It's definitely going to be a different way there. But let's talk about the Suns on offense. That was a long period of the Suns on
defense is so important against this team. Like, I have a feeling we're going to spend way less time talking about offense, but it's just defense against this team is huge. So that's where most of the big questions are. Anyway, start.
Who's the pigeon?
Okay.
Who's the pigeon?
Well, Davis Bertans is the pigeon.
If he plays, he's
in at all. I already posted that before we got recording
Davis
here.
Bertans is like a pigeon after it's been hit by a car and just is dead on the road. But like
if he plays, because I just looked at the game log. He played like 15 minutes games 1 through 3. Then games 5 and 6, he played like 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 2 minutes in the closeout game. Even that, like, because let's just be honest. Here's the thing about this: is a crazy advantage that the Suns have. Depth is an advantage in the playoffs. Even in the playoffs, if Reggie Bullock and Dorian Finney-Smith are, I know Mikal Bridges just played 47 minutes or whatever in that one game, by the way, but you're legitimately forcing the Mavericks into a situation where, based on their series against the Jazz, Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock have to play over 40 minutes every single game because they are their only two wings who Kidd really trusts. Mm-hmm. And his only solution to prevent a situation where the two of them at the 3 and the 4 have to literally play 48 minutes is sprinkle in a couple of minutes of Davis Bertans as a filler, as a bridge, and sprinkle in a couple of minutes of Josh Green as a bridge. And Josh Green is a really young guy, talented defensively, not a shooter at all. So that right there is one disadvantage for Dallas because you can't exactly space anyone 5 out if one of the guys you don't have to guard. So that right there, advantage for the Suns. And then Davis Bertans, if he plays 6 to 8 minutes just to bridge, just to give DFS a little bit of a break or whatever, pigeon. You attack him every time. You put him in every pick and roll action. You specifically check Chris Paul in right at that precise moment where you see Davis Bertans is in the game and say, okay, go out there for 3 minutes and just kill him. Just fucking kill him.
Run that pigeon over.
That's the main pigeon. Let
me just quickly
go for it.
For those who are confused what the hell we're talking about, because we've only talked about this on playback streams, a pigeon is what the Suns refer to as the weak point. They call out a pigeon on the court. So this is the weak point on the other team. So when they're saying, when Bertans checks in, they'll say that's the pigeon right there. That means involve him in all the actions. Yeah.
That's the Enes Kanter pick and roll at 0-0 every time.
Like Michael Porter Jr. in the Nuggets series. In
Luke
the first
Kennard.
round, it was some sort of combination of probably Alvarado, Brandon Ingram. Actually, David Nash, our friend, just put out a great video calling out the pigeon in different plays. It's pretty funny. Highly recommend watching that one. Mm-hmm.
For the 44 minutes per game when Davis Bertans isn't in, specifically for that reason, because they know he's going to be the pigeon, are you asking who's the pigeon the rest of the time?
It's Luka, right?
I was just going to say it's a lot more difficult. You could make a case for Luka. You could make a case for Dinwiddie for sure.
It was Luka against the Jazz.
It's not always obvious, is just my point.
Yeah,
but it is probably Luka.
Their defense has been good. I mean, the seventh in defense since the All-Star break. They're a good defensive team. The defense is, in many ways, what carried them to the record that they had, which put them, fourth? I think they ended up being. So Luka's not what he was last year defensively. I'll start by saying that for any Mavs fans that are listening, shouting at their phone that Luka's pretty good at defense now. Yeah, that's probably true. Now, whether it be because of his injury,
They did not make it 52 minutes into this episode, friend. Sorry.
we've been pretty nice.
To tell you.
We've been pretty nice to the Mavs in this podcast, I'll say.
Yeah.
But
we actually talk about the basketball, which not everyone does.
Yeah.
But, it's
right. We can pronounce all their names. When it comes to Luka on the court, I think you can attack him in many, many, many ways. Now, actually, I was just listening to Jeff Van Gundy, who was on the Low Post. They briefly touched on the Mavs versus the Suns, and Jeff Van Gundy, in one of the most, I don't even understand how he could possibly come to this conclusion. He said the Suns don't have a lot of options to target individual defenders. He's a coach.
It's crazy to me because I would have given him a pass for that if this was last year, before the world caught up exactly to who the Suns were. But you've been through an entire finals run. The Suns played 40 games on national TV this year, of which I know damn well, Jeff Van Gundy, you were sitting right there arguing with Mark Jackson.
Yeah, that's
for many
probably why
of them
you didn't
on the
know
broadcast team. How you come to that conclusion is baffling. That is baffling.
The Suns
that's their entire identity that their offense is predicated on is the fucking pigeon. We've talked about it all year.
Now, I think his point was in isolation, I guess, because he said that they don't have the foot speed to attack him off the dribble. Fine. Yeah, maybe that's kind of true, right? They don't have like Anthony Edwards just attacking him one-on-one. But that's not the only way to do it.
But yeah.
I mean, I think that if the Suns have proven anything, I mean, go back and watch the second round last year. If the Suns have proven anything, it's that they are one of the most creative at finding ways to attack the pigeon on defense in the league. And I think they're going to come up with some really interesting ways to attack Luka. But another one, outside of that, is DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton, the second best offensive player throughout the first round. A remarkable series where he was, I think, over 70% true shooting percentage on the series.
And over 70% field goal percentage, too.
Incredible. But here's the thing. They're going to go small. And maybe they'll switch a lot. I think they have there's a chance that they switch a lot. And we know what that means. That means Ayton has to be Ayton. And I think at this point, there's just no fear, right? That he's not going to show up.
Every series since we started covering this team of the playoffs, we say the same goddamn thing. It's always for a different reason, but it's the same goddamn thing.
We always say an important role. Huh?
We always say this is a DeAndre Ayton series, and it's whatever the reason is. Sometimes it's DeAndre Ayton, he needs to match their physicality and grab all the rebounds. DeAndre Ayton, he needs to go one-on-one with Jokic and lock him down. DeAndre Ayton, he needs to survive against small ball. Whatever it is, the guy's always fucking important, and you can see it. Yeah. In every single series we've talked about it, this series will not be an exception. If they go small with Finney-Smith, which they'll only do, by the way, I wanted to throw out the numbers. The numbers, specifically, they've played exactly 22 minutes against Utah throughout that series, so about 4 or 5 minutes per game, with Dorian Finney-Smith at the 5. Their offensive rating was 124. That is exceptional. Their defensive rating, 119, which is putrid. And that is not a large sample size, so I don't think that's anything to necessarily base the entire philosophy around of does it work, does it not work. Regardless, I think they believe in the power of it theoretically, and they're going to go to it again. So for DeAndre, we know what the deal is with small ball right now, particularly against a team like this, which is 30th in pace. You're going to grab defensive rebounds, but then you're going to gun it down the floor. You're going to seal early, and you're going to kill them over and over again with your hook shot. Or sometimes after that Pelicans series, we even know you've got the combo of moves. You can go into the initial turnaround, and then, oh, wait, it's actually a hook shot. You can think they're going for a hook shot, and then, oh, wait, I'm actually putting the ball on the floor and taking it in for a floater or all the way to the rim. He's got the package that he can display at this point. You're not worried about him going against Finney-Smith offensively. You're not worried about him going against Kleba offensively either. That's a matchup where obviously he can just clean up on the offensive boards as well, so it's pretty simple there. So for DeAndre, you just got to play with energy. You got to play with pace. It's kind of weird, honestly, Mike, because I think one of my overall takeaways in this series is how often can you say this about a matchup in the NBA playoffs between any two teams? Doesn't matter if it's the first round, second round, or the finals. The Suns are legitimately these three things over the Dallas Mavs. They are faster. Their pace is literally way better. Or not better, that's a subjective term, but they are literally very fast. 2, they are more physical. They're going to have a rebounding advantage. And 3, they are deeper. Yeah. They have more guys who you trust deep in. So what does that mean? I mean, how often can you say that a team is both faster and they're more physical? They're both more physical and they have more players, more bodies to throw at you. What that means is that the Suns have an enormous advantage here where they can wear Dallas down strategically throughout the course of a series. And the only thing that Dallas has to fall back on is, can they keep it close enough? Can they keep these games just close enough to where they're in the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter and they can hope for some Luka magic or some Jalen Brunson magic? And if they're a good enough clutch team, as good enough of a clutch team as they want to believe they are, they can steal a couple games that way. But is it a sustainable strategy with all of those other factors working against them? They're not going to have the rebounding advantage. They're not going to have the transition offense advantage. They've got guys who are going to have to log 44, 45 minutes per game just to break even. They are working against quite a few things here, and they're going to have their hands full in some against the Suns.
All 3 games in the regular season against the Mavs this year, the Suns went into the fourth quarter down and then won by outscoring them in the fourth quarter, which is just not something that I think you can count on as much against this iteration of the Mavs. I think you got to really put it on them early and try not to let the clutch time of the game decide the game. As good as the Suns have been, anything can happen against a team that has been this good in the clutch as well. The Mavericks defense, we're talking about how good they are. They limit shots at the rim and limit shots from 3. That's pretty good for the Suns because the Suns don't do either of those that much. They shoot a lot of shots in mid-range, and they have essentially now, I think we could confidently say they have 4 guys that can shoot 50% plus from 3 over the course of a series. Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Mikal Bridges. All 4 of those guys can have an extremely hot shooting series from mid-range. If the Mavs fall back on what they've been good at throughout the season, they're giving the Suns exactly what they want. And that's a really good thing for the Suns. I have a note here in my notes. It just says Devin Booker hates them. Because he does. And I watch a lot of Suns games. I've watched basically every game of Devin Booker's career, every game of DeAndre Ayton's career, down the line. And I think that I can't say this for certain, but I think that Devin Booker has always hated the coronation of Luka Doncic and the way that Luka Doncic had become a star, basically immediately past.
They've never let it show publicly, for the record. Never.
People close to Devin Booker have.
I just mean that doesn't mean he's going out there and saying
no.
Devin
Booker holds it in. Yeah.
By all means, everything they've said to the media so far have been the right answers. They respect Luka. You can tell. Just talk to DeAndre Ayton. By the way, it's so clear that those two specifically are still friends.
Yeah, they're friends
to this day.
Yeah.
They share the same agent, I believe, still. So, but yeah, with Booker, he's never let it show to the media. But I do have a suspicion that you're right. Yeah. Narrative-wise.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to matter too because, look, I don't know how healthy he is. I do think that the hamstring, if it was what they say it was, he should be fine by the time this series starts. I think people are maybe slightly overrating the total impact that could have on the series.
What is it? Point. What are we up to on the day count by this point? Monday?
I think it'll be 13 days, or 14 games.
Days?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Days, I mean. Yeah, so that's... I think that should be fine.
It's right along Windhorst's original timeline, which he Googled.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I think he could be fine, and he's had time, of course, to work on it and make sure that he's as healthy as can be. If it's a slight tear, which is essentially what a strain is, it's a slight tear, I think that there's a good chance that that's basically healed by then. But I think the Suns' ability to shoot from mid-range, the Suns' ability to attack weak points defensively, and then on the other end of that, they could win the second chance points battle, which is maybe this might be the only series. I guess against the Warriors is a possibility, but if they make it to the finals, this might be the only series where they can confidently win that battle. In the last few games for Ayton, I think he's averaged 15 rebounds against them. I think there's a chance he has massive rebounding games against this team as they stretch the floor out. They have to get onto long rebounds, right? The Suns have been unlucky with a lot of long rebounds, at least in the first round. But they're going to launch a lot of threes, and sometimes those rebounds bounce to different places. So they're going to have more than DeAndre and chasing down the defensive rebounds as well.
After that series against the Pelicans, where the Pelicans kind of can't shoot to begin with, but they also just don't take a ton of them, I think game 1, game 2, we're going to be watching the basketball drop, and it will be jarring to be playing a team that shoots over 43s again. And this is kind of the flow of, I think, how it's going to work throughout the rest of the playoffs, is playing teams like this, but Dallas being a supreme example of it, of just adhering to those Morey ball principles. They want to get to the rim. They want to take threes. Other than a couple guys, they're not going to be taking too many mid-range shots. And there's going to be Phoenix on one end taking 25, 30 threes per game. It's a weapon for them, but it's not their go-to. Dallas, it's going to be every other possession, if not even maybe 50, a little over 50% of the time. Their possessions are going to end with a three. So, yeah, you got to be ready for those long rebounds. It's just going to be all the time, constant.
Last thing on offense for me, because I don't think we have to stick on this too long. We're already getting pretty long in this podcast here, but is Bullock going to guard Chris Paul? Is it going to be Brunson? We talked about offense this whole time, and we have yet to mention one of the greatest offensive players in the history of the NBA.
Yeah, because Dorian Finney-Smith
is going to be on book.
Dorian Finney-Smith is going to be on book because he historically has been on book. And by the way, I do want to say, yes, Booker has had his moments. Yes, he's cooked Dorian Finney-Smith in the past. If you look at the tracking data, I know it's tracking data. Like people only want to mention the tracking data when it says good things, and when it says bad things, they say, "Oh, tracking data fucking sucks." That's how it tends to work. But the tracking data is pretty kind towards Dorian Finney-Smith on Booker historically. It seems to suggest, I don't have the exact numbers here because I didn't compile it because I knew people would just shout at me if I posted it, but it points towards a picture of Dorian Finney-Smith actually being relatively successful on Book over the past few years. So take that for what it's worth. Mm-hmm. But you're right, they don't have a great second defender.
It's got to be Bullock as far as the second best on-ball defender in the starting
to put
lineup.
On Chris Paul. But then if you put Bullock on Chris Paul, Mikal Bridges has Jalen Brunson on him or something like that.
But on the other side of that, Chris Paul has Reggie Bullock on him.
No, I know. I'm mostly speaking about in from Dallas's perspective.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. So it could be Brunson, but I think it could be. The point is, when the Suns are running pick and rolls with DeAndre Ayton and Chris Paul, there might be a pigeon on Chris Paul from Chris Paul's standards. And as far as Chris Paul's ability to run guys into screens, he had two guys that were pretty good at dodging those screens in the last round. And I don't think they have anyone that's going to be good at that in this round. And I think Chris Paul could have a massive series as a result of that. I just don't think they have anyone to guard him.
If they start the games with Dwight Powell, they might be in for a rude awakening pretty fucking quick if Chris Paul is putting a Jalen Brunson, Dwight Powell pick and roll through action over and over again, where Powell's going to be dropping. Brunson is 5'9", as you say. He's not actually 5'9", but doesn't have the length to be effective as a trailer in the defense, right? So he's going to be instantly trailing the play. Chris Paul's going to snake the pick and roll.
Chris Paul's going to put his big old butt on him and push him backwards.
He's going to hit a million right elbow jumpers over Dwight Powell. And now you're going to be 6 minutes into the game. The Suns are already up 12, and you say, "Well, fuck, I guess we're going to play Maxi Kleber for 30 minutes per game this series because Dwight Powell just
hope he shoots, right?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking through all of this, I think it's pretty obvious what they're going to do with Devin Booker. I just think it's just not very obvious what they're going to do with Chris Paul. And I think the thing about Chris Paul is sometimes people take for granted just how consistent he's been. One bad game basically in the playoffs for the Suns outside of the finals the entire time he's been here, and it was against the Pelicans. So
his stats the past two seasons combined against Dallas, 6 games. The Suns have won all 6, obviously. And he's averaged 20 points and 10 assists per game.
And he, over his career, the entire time he's been in the NBA, he averages 20 points, 9 assists, 4 rebounds against the Mavs. He's just incredibly consistent against that team. And I just don't know. I'm really interested to see what they do with him because I don't think they're going to trap him either. I don't think they have the personnel to trap. Yeah.
No, they're not going to trap him. Here's a fun tidbit, by the way. I forget which beat reporter asked about this, so apologies, but just something I forgot. Chris Paul's very first playoff series back in, I want to say 2006. Guess who it was against? Against Jason Kidd.
Interesting.
Long history between those guys. It's pretty funny. It's just pretty funny that we're in a point in NBA history now where Chris Paul is still there doing his thing, taking control over games, having perfect games in the playoffs, and going up against old teammates. I don't know if they were nemesis.
Willie Green was his teammate.
yeah. Or nemesis. I don't know if I would call Jason Kidd a nemesis for Chris Paul anyways, exactly. But yeah, still there doing his thing while time marches on.
X factors, real quick. I'll just list them out. We don't have to spend on. But I think Devin Booker's health is one. I'm not super worried about it, but I have to mention it. We talked about it, but DeAndre Ayton versus small ball lineups. I think always. This was interesting.
An X factor in every series.
This one's interesting. The Mavs run a ton of stack, Spain pick and roll, snap, whatever you want to call it, the screener action. The Suns have a very unique and interesting way of defending that, and have done very good at that throughout the season. And their ability to sniff it out, then snuff it out, I think is going to be really important. And on the other end of that, how the Mavs defend stack, how the Mavs defend pick and roll.
If you've been watching their Spain action specifically, you would know better than me. Who's typically their back screener there?
Often,
because obviously
Dorian
it's going to be Powell rolling.
Yeah.
Finney-Smith or Bullock.
Bullock is often Bullock didn't enter the starting lineup until like halfway through the season, and I think since then he's done a lot of it. And it was complicated, a lot more complicated when they played two bigs with Kristaps Porzingis in. But now I think it's they clearly made a roster. I mean, I have
here. Exactly. I have here that Bullock, Brunson, and Dorian Finney-Smith are all at least 70th percentile this season on spot-up efficiency. So they've got, and also, by the way, that Dwight Powell was 93rd percentile as a roller in terms of his efficiency. So they've got all of the pieces. The mechanics are right there. All you need is talented playmaker with good court vision and throw in one spot-up shooter and one roll man, and they have exactly that. And that right there, that's a stack. That's a Spain pick and roll in action. So
having said that,
got the pieces.
In the first round, they often ran a 5-out ISO or like a 5-out pick and pop with Luka Doncic or Jalen Brunson on the ball. So they do kind of resort to Morey ball, hardened ball in the playoffs more in a way that I think would benefit the Suns, unless they're just offensive efficiency on step back threes is through the roof. Because if it is, then I think you could easily drop a game or two just from that alone. So while they do run a lot of Spain pick and roll, I think the Suns are going to they've done a good job all season defending that play. And if they don't and just resort to Morey ball, I think the Suns could do a good job just staying true and even bringing a second guy at Luka if he starts to get hot. So we'll see what happens there. You have any other obvious X factors that you want to touch on before we go?
Of course. We haven't talked about... Well, I briefly mentioned that I said the Suns are a deeper team than the Mavs, and that is absolutely true in theory because the Mavs only have 7 guys that they really trust in their rotation. However, it only works if... Can Cam Payne have a big game this series? Can Cam Johnson have a big game this series? Can the Suns' depth play to their advantage the way that we expect? And I don't think that this is a defense that necessarily would give them trouble with that or necessarily would be super easy for those guys to exploit. I think it's just kind of an average defense. They have to go through the motions and run their typical stuff. But can Cam Payne generate that momentum? If he can't, is Landry Shamet the answer? Is Aaron Holiday the answer? We mentioned on the last pod as we wrapped up the Pelicans series, the Suns can't survive forever without getting production out of a third guard who comes off the bench. I think they can survive in this series. They can win this series if Cam Payne posts another 6-game stinker, but they can't survive forever. So they do need a more long-term sustainable solution to that, and I hope they can find it in these games.
If you start to see cocky Cameron Payne at the end of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter, the game's already over at that point because his production is going to be huge in this series as well. But both Cams need to step up, and we need to see better. We didn't focus on them, but both of them didn't play very well, I think, in the first round, and we need to see better play from both of them, and that would be nice to see, along with Jay Crowder. But I think Jay Crowder, people sort of undersell the extra stuff he does outside of the shooting, so we'll see how he plays. But I agree with that. I think bench play is always an X factor in every playoff series, for every team, for every series, because it can be such a difference maker or it can be a killer. You put one really bad defender, which luckily the Suns don't do, but you put one really bad defender on the floor for a 10-minute stretch and the other team could outscore you by 15 points in that 10-minute stretch, 5 minutes in the first half, 5 minutes in the second half. So I totally agree with that's an important thing as well. Anything else?
No, I think we've more or less covered it adequately. What would you say?
I mean, there's definitely more.
There's more. But you guys...
We're going to talk about it after every single game. So I think we'll have more opportunities to talk about it.
We've already waited too long and people only have a day to listen to this. So
yeah, exactly.
Hopefully we gave you what you were looking for.
Thank you guys for listening to this one. I'm very much looking forward to this second round. I think it can be contentious and fun. I
think it's going to be fun too. Can I just say again though, and now that we've talked about this team completely, I still think the Pelicans, I hope I... Am I jinxing anything if I say more? I'm not going to say more. I just think the Pelicans were a really good team, and that has no bearing on what I think about the Mavs. So we'll leave it at that. And let's go.
The Pelicans were very well suited to play against the Suns.
They were a scarier.
Where the Mavs, I don't think are
matchup in terms of just their 1-for-1 assignments that you had, specifically, how they matched up against us. I think the Mavs. My initial impression. This is not a series projection. Don't hold this against me. It's just my initial impression. Is that they're going to have their hands full. They have more issues to tackle.
Having said that, the Pelicans greatly benefited from the Suns' MVP best player not playing the majority of the series. And I just hope that doesn't happen, because we're talking about these series, of course, assuming full health of both teams outside of Tim Hardaway Jr., who's likely just out for the rest of the playoffs. But yes, thank you everybody for listening to this one. We'll be back after every game. The plan is to do a playback watch party for Game 3. If you'd like to join us for that, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/thetimeline. We appreciate you guys, and we'll be back after Game 1.
For over a century, Johnny Walker has shared its bold spirit with the game of golf. Now, crafted with Devereaux Golf, Johnny Walker introduces the Johnny Walker Blue Label-inspired Sunday Golf Bag, elevating the game with sleek design, Blue Label hues, and refined gold accents. Celebrate your hole-in-one with a premium Sunday bag crafted by Devereaux Golf. Submit proof of your achievement to johnnywalker.com/blue-in-1. Please drink responsibly.